Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Literacy View Live. We are so happy to be here with you tonight. We're doing something very different today. So, Judy and I have done Takeaway Tuesdays with different episodes, and it got a great response. So, we said, all right, let's try something a little different. Let's bring on some listeners who had something to say about the episode. And so Judy began inviting people on to be with us. We have two right now. We might have more hopping on. And this
Faith,
is
can I just chime in for 1 second?
yeah.
So we're supposed to have a couple more people. So people might be hopping on, hopping off tonight. Tonight's going to be a wild night. If by any chance you're one of the people that's supposed to be here and you're lost in cyberspace, just message me because you might be on the wrong link. You might be on the link for people that are watching the live stream rather than the guest link. So just message me. Don't panic. We're here for you. And Faith will now continue.
Okay. So why don't we start off by having our guests introduce themselves? So we'll start with Brittany. Brittany, tell us who you are, what you teach, and your interest in coming on with us.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I've been looking forward to this night. My name is Brittany Bode. I teach second grade. I'm from a little town in Michigan, little farm town, McBain. And we have really shifted our focus at our school and have worked really hard, with the science of reading and implementing research-based practices for our phonics instruction. We just in the last couple of years have started using OG through MC. And, I'm seeing kids who are starting to read now, and really wanting to know that next step. Say, you know how to read now. Now, what do I do with that? Reading words just as words isn't enough, So I was really, really intrigued, I'll say, after that last episode. So I appreciate you letting me come on with you tonight.
Well, we're so happy to have you. Thank you. And Laura.
Hello, so I'm Laura Patronilla. I just wrapped up my 11th year teaching in a Title I school in Texas, like an hour outside of San Antonio. I've been primarily, I guess, upper elementary and middle school. I taught gen ed 6th and 8th grade, but then was also working as a dyslexia interventionist with K through 8. So now I'm back in upper elementary classroom, and oral language has just always been something that, especially when you're working with the older kids, even as their decoding becomes more confident, if their oral language isn't there, it's just such a struggle. And then being in the older grades, it's a situation of how do I accelerate the foundation and still teach the grade level expectation. So it's a very, it's probably the most challenging aspect of teaching in upper elementary when you have kids that aren't on grade level.
Well, Laura, thank you for being here. And your questions, both of you, are everyone else's questions. So, I'm sure everybody out there feels what you're feeling right now because we had such an amazing response to this episode. And I think that Trina and Doug hit on so many things that many of you felt it was important, but really didn't know how to navigate this because we didn't really get trained in oral language. And it's something that was just assumed would happen. So this is going to be a really great night. We're going to do our Takeaway Tuesday format. Judy Boksner and I usually would do this ourselves, but we want to hear from you, and maybe we will pop in during, after, how we kind of are freewheeling with all of this. And after we have our takeaways, we're going to have Trina and Doug with us doing Q&A, where we got some questions from our listeners. I know I have a question, and anything that can be clarified from last time, hopefully we'll get it done tonight. Before we get started, I just want to let people know that Judy and I started doing some consulting work. We're now the Literacy View LLC. So that's brand new for us. And if anybody wants to get in touch with us, just go to our website and you can email us at Faith and Judy. So that's A-N-D, Faith and Judy @gmail.com. We look forward to hearing from you. We look forward to working with you. And we're already getting lots of interest, and it's truly, truly exciting. We're very happy to do this work. So Judy, you wanted to say something?
Yes. So another thing, tonight's going to be totally interactive. We want to hear from everybody. The chat's open. I'm going to be monitoring the chat as the ladies are speaking. If you have questions, comments, concerns, things that you're thinking about, comprehension is a hot topic. So is oral language. We give in so much focus to decoding and phonemic awareness and other strands of literacy tonight. Let's rock and roll with these strands. Let's do it.
Okay. So we're going to start off with takeaways. So we'll start off with Laura first, okay? Laura, if you were going to recommend something to a teacher, what would be your takeaway for a teacher focus?
What I think maybe one of my big takeaways was getting away from that IRE structure and into more of a collaborative dialogue with students, but in a way that's structured. And so I think that is one of the biggest, I think it even goes more to like pedagogy than just like teaching strategies. It's a major mind shift. And I think as we move away from balanced literacy, our questioning methods are really one of those. It's like it's so baked in, you don't realize that you're limiting what your classroom conversations can be. And then I also think as a teacher, it would be a very hard thing to like build that toolkit and would require a lot of ongoing coaching.
We're going to talk about that. That's a really, really good point. Brittany, teacher nugget, if you listen to the episode, what do you think is a takeaway from a teacher perspective?
I think that I could just start with the takeaway that I came and implemented in my classroom the next day, something that easy, And in the episode, we talked about how a lot of our instruction around comprehension is teacher-led, and I'm looking for them to give me more. And I'm like, why aren't they giving me more? Well, because I haven't taught them how to give me more in just the communication and the oral language. And so I switched something. My takeaway was to really let the kids use that story grammar among themselves and just talk about it. We're not writing it down. I'm not giving them a skill sheet that says main idea, and these are the details that tell me the main idea. I taught them the story grammar, and I gave them a story and say, okay, turn and share. Who were the characters you remember? And just orally. And I could see so much more comprehension from my kids, just that way than I have seen in the last year, by giving them a worksheet and telling them, okay, you're comparing and contrasting this, or you're giving me, a summary of this. I would just oral language. When I let them do that orally, I saw such a difference in my kids.
Judy, any questions or comments about that first takeaway?
I'm totally with Brittany. I think one of the biggest takeaways for me, and it was something that I was passionate about, but something that I didn't insist upon enough, is when students are answering questions or like I'm coaching with a teacher and, we're so excited that kids are responding, but very often kids are responding with like one-word answers. Taking that time and not worrying we worry about outpacing in, the gradual release and making sure that kids have practice. But part of that practice experience is being able to talk and be able to speak in a full sentence. So taking that time to reiterate that and to, prioritize and make sure that that's something that's prioritized.
So interesting. When Laura mentioned the idea of a mind shift, that really resonated for me, because there were some things that were mentioned, such as dialogic reading. And, I'm a big fan of dialogic reading. But when Trina said, I think it was Trina, she said, compared to what? Those are the words I remember. Compared to what? And that was like a big wake-up call for me. Anyhow, let's go on.
And can you, for the viewers out there that need some clarification or don't have a lot of experience with that, explain that term?
So I think what both Doug and Trina were trying to get across was we had these ideas about what we should be doing to increase comprehension, and such as looking at fluency, oral reading fluency. But then they said, well, we didn't have anything else that we were looking at to compare it to. So yeah, it looks like it's like this great tool, or it's not really a tool, the assessment, that would be something by itself would be enough, but we never really compared it to anything else. And that to me was really a wake-up call. So let's move on to now the administrator. Let's reverse this. We'll start with Brittany. So Brittany, if you could give an administrator a takeaway from the episode, what do you think an administrator could walk away with that's important, practical, something that you think is a takeaway?
I would say just putting as much emphasis, we have spent the last couple of years, and I know a lot of administrators and a lot of school districts have put that emphasis on the phonics instruction, but making sure, that we're providing teachers with training, of how to follow through with this language and comprehension aspect and that part of the rope. That's something I definitely don't feel equipped right now, especially after listening to the episode. I don't feel like I have the training, that I would like to have to do what's best for my kids in this area. So
thank you for your honesty. And believe me, like I said before, you're not alone. Everything you're feeling, we have so many other people saying the same thing. Trust me. Laura, what would you say to an administrator after listening to this episode?
I would reiterate the importance. Well, I mean, everything Brittany said, but then also the importance of vertical alignment. Like when you look at, like, it just made me thinking as far as that, like linking it to the compared to what, like when I have my students do like a CSPS or somebody wanted but so then, and we treat that as an adequate proof of a retell compared to starting your pre-K, kinder first kids with a structured program like Story Champs. By the time they get to upper elementary, they're ready to really take off and go to very analytical and, they can analyze literature. They can also write. I think about it a lot with like the link of writing. If K through 2 provided that oral foundation for sentence structure and complex sentences, where we could be in those upper grades. So I think just finding the time for vertical alignment and making sure that the structured activities are consistent and actually have, a pathway to proficiency for all the students on your campus.
Judy, any thoughts?
Just with the ladies, like I think that, we have to provide teachers with more professional development that really, helps us with this strands of literacy, because like, as I've been saying on a lot of the episodes, I had, very little training during my balanced literacy days. It was just like throwing out these questions. And I thought that was great comprehension. Like, I always asked questions. What happened in the story? What happened first? What happened next? What happened last? How did the character feel? But it wasn't really like the systematic, structured way. And I know that, we've gotten a lot of pushback on the literacy view about strategies, but there are research-based strategies that can help students learn how to, really dig deeper into a text. Of course, knowledge building is important, but it's also important to show kids explicitly our metacognition, how our brain is working to tackle things. And, as I'm visiting classrooms, I can see that my teachers, a lot of them, they're amazing teachers, but they are craving more instruction on how to get the comprehension piece right. And I notice, it's end of year testing time, and a lot of my kids are reading these passages and they're getting better at being able to like tell us details in the text and so forth. But it's because we listen to kids read, and very often kids are getting better at decoding, but we have to give that same love and gusto to the strands of comprehension as well, in order to make sure that they're not just reading to read, but reading to understand.
So here's what I would tell an administrator. And it was something that Doug said. He said, they have to produce. That was the key word. They have to produce language. So it's not enough just to be able to listen to complex language. We have to get them talking, because the talking is how they get better at understanding. And so I think an administrator needs to really understand that, because in K and 1, a lot of times you hear silent classrooms, right? And that's encouraged by administrators, to be quiet, be quiet, be quiet. No, we have to get them talking. And that's important. We have Beth joining us. Here we go. Yay, Beth.
Hi.
Beth,
Sorry, I'm so
Beth,
late.
you found us.
I was thinking it started at 7:30 instead of 7. I apologize.
It's okay, Beth. So happy to meet you. So
Nice to meet you all as well.
Oh, nice. So Beth Netherland has been communicating with me on Twitter for how long now, Beth?
I think at least maybe a year or two, like, because one of the dyslexia dads I'd recommended, the one from Texas, because that's where I live, and I think that's when we started communicating.
I think so. That's right. That was your recommendation. So you know what? I'm going to throw this out to you. What would be a nugget for a teacher and a nugget for an administrator? What would you say?
So I was like kind of going back through their presentation, writing down notes. So the administrators, I liked what Doug said about it's not necessarily a literacy crisis, but a leadership crisis. And I think a lot of it is not understanding what language is, because language is so, I think it's pretty abstract when you look at those components of the ropes and everything. And then the nuggets for a teacher, I feel like what Judy had talked about last time, that the teachers are rated on like a flawed design of the like programs and curriculums. And even Trina went in like deep about implementation and how teachers' voices are really important when they're implementing what they know from research, and about how she had to scaffold it more and, and add that script in. And so what they're doing in the research setting, that you have to tweak it for how it works in the classroom. But yeah, as a parent, I think my takeaways were that, and I think this is something I've known because my son has language learning difficulties and ADHD. My mother's a retired speech pathologist, but even after you listen to your talk with Trina and Doug, is that the schools aren't really doing it, because the Capon article, what was it, 23% of the time. And then Trina said that a lot of times it's low quality. And then at the end, it was like they're not assessing it. So if you're not assessing it, then, how are you going to be able to address it appropriately? And then the research takeaway was, I think there's like Trina and Doug said, there's a ton of research out there, but it was getting misinterpreted. And And I think that implementation support is the important piece for the researchers to realize when they have to work with practitioners that and I think a lot of the researchers are getting better at that. I know at Texas A&M, because I live in College Station, and my son has been through the CAT method. And I know when they were working with teachers on that they, that was very important, the implementation piece, listening to the teachers' voices. And
So
then the impact on.
it was our episode that we had on text structure,
Mhm.
right? With
Yes.
The Texas people. So that's
Yeah.
something you were familiar with. Very cool.
Yes.
So
Wait, let me ask a question. So Beth, tell me, what is your role in education? Remind me.
I'm just a parent.
I love that.
Yeah.
I love that.
don't say it's just a parent, because that's a very important role. And that's where we're going next. So Beth kind of kicked us off with a parent perspective. I'm so glad we have a parent here. So Brittany, what nugget would you give to a parent from the episode? If you were talking to a parent, what's one thing that you think a parent could walk away with that would be important from this episode?
I think I actually have these conversations a lot about a lot of things, not just this episode, but just the bang for your buck of just having conversations with your kids, and just practicing oral language and providing a rich language for your kids. I just had a conversation with somebody today. If everybody would just read a book to their kids out loud and just talk about it with them every day, once a day, 10 minutes, how much difference that would make for a lot of students that I see in my classroom, where, there's not a lot of rich conversations happening in the home. So I would just put an emphasis to parents of conversations matter. You don't have to be the most intelligent person in the world. Just have a conversation with your kids and let them practice speaking to people and using language. Use language with them. You don't have to just use, simple terms. Since the episode, I have a 2-year-old and a 1-year-old, and I find myself all of the time, what's another word I could say for that? Except for just the big something or the cold something, or are you happy with that? I've been practicing.
Faith, wait, Brittany. Faith, I still didn't put batteries in my buttons. Can you give Brittany a cheers, please? Because what she's talking about reminds me of what happened in my classroom today. That multiple meaning of word part. I was in a bilingual class today, and we were doing foundations, and I was coaching a teacher, and we were talking about the word coach. And very often teachers just want to tell kids what words mean, but kids might have experiences with those words. So we rephrased the conversation. Does anybody know the coaches in our building? That opened up such an amazing discussion. Kids were telling us the name of the gym coaches, but then the teacher that I'm coaching said, but there's other type of coaches in our building. Who knows what other types of coaches there are? And then the kids finally got it, that I'm a literacy coach in the building, and there's another literacy coach in the building. So Brittany, I'm drinking to you.
Well, I'll press the cheers button for you, Judy. And I'll drink up as well, okay?
Cheers.
Wait, Faith. So that means we don't only drink for Lucy, we drink for good things.
That's right. That's right. It's not just a Lucy drinking game. All right. Laura, any parent takeaway?
Yes, so when my youngest is 3 years old, she just turned 3 at the beginning of the month. And when she was born, I really went off the deep end as far as like how vague the milestones are and the complete lack of information you're given as a parent. And I have a unique perspective because of my career. And there is just such a large and well done body of literature on the importance of 0 to 3 and the serve and return conversations. And it's just not shared with parents. And I don't understand why. And I'm kind of really critical as a teacher and a parent, that the schools don't really encourage it. I know that there's nonprofits that work on, explaining the importance of serve and return relationships, but it's just, if we know that language at kinder entry is predictive of language in 5th grade, then don't we have a vested interest to encourage a certain level of kinder readiness? So that really is hard for me to deal with. But
you know what? I have to tell you something, Laura. We've had this conversation before, and we are passionate about that pre-K age group, that birth to 5. And serve and return, for anyone who wants to know, is in my book, If Only I Would Have Known book. So that book is geared to parents because they are not getting the message. And that's the reason I wrote that book. It's for parents before their children actually start school. So they do know. And though that was a term that was said to me, oh, if only I would have known, and at that point, it was kind of too late. And I went back and tried to give parents that information so they would know how important serve and return is. If I were to give parents a message, I would think the idea that book language is really important. That yes, it's great to have conversations about anything, but getting that complex language, that academic language, you could really only get from a book. So I would say the read alouds are very important, and to really go deeply into trying to get kids to talk. That dialogic piece, I still think is very important besides the retell. All right, so next one, a research nugget. So Beth, you already kicked off your research nugget. If we could hear from our other 2 people, doesn't matter, Laura, Brittany, whoever wants to start, and we'll circle back to Beth if she wants to add something in on this. Who wants to start? Doesn't matter. Brittany, you want to start?
Yeah, I can.
Okay. Yeah, research nugget.
Honest. My research nugget is my mind is jungled and so confused of all the research. I just want to tell me what to do, because I feel like there's research around everything, and I think that was my biggest thing. As I listened to the episode with Doug and Trina, and research says this and research says that. Well, why am I doing this then? Because the curriculum and the program I'm using in my classroom doesn't have that. So why is that allowed? you know? So
exactly. That's such a good point.
So that's where
I love the honesty here. I just absolutely love it. Laura, what about you?
I would be interested in knowing if the comprehension method research has improved. Like, of the research that I've read, it seems like a lot of the studies are really either very small, or they found, like, when they're going back, that summarizing was this set of activities in one classroom and another set of activities in another classroom. And so the studies didn't seem like you could really get a lot of definitive information out of them.
I think what I'm hearing is it's very confusing because there's a lot of contradictory information. Judy, what about you on the research nugget? Any thoughts?
I think for me, the research nugget is that we have to pay attention to the research and not just continue to worship like these people that will come up on social media and everybody's like, oh my God, this person said this. No, what did the research say? And when we don't understand the research, which sometimes I don't, I'll text Faith, I'll go on ChatGPT, I'll go everywhere. But, researchers just break it down for us so that we really understand what does that mean in terms of application. Because it's still very confusing in terms of the comprehension. And what makes it even more difficult is that there's these people on social media that will say that it's one solution. Oh no, it's knowledge. No, it's strategies. No, it's both. We know it's both. Now that we know that it's both, how do we actually implement? And I think that's why I'm so excited that Trina and Doug are sitting here online listening to this, and hopefully they'll help us clear up this hot mess. And I know that, Trina's been messaging me for a while, and she's like, wait, we only have like a half hour, maybe 45 minutes to go deeper. And yes, this is a bulky topic, and we're not going to have all the answers at the end of this podcast, but that's why we have the literacy view. We will not stop asking questions. We will not stop seeking clarity, because even myself, I've been in education now for 28 years. I think I have a lot of strengths, but I think I still have a lot to learn, and I need clarity in terms of the research as well still.
Beth, is there anything that you want to add? Because I know you jumped on, and I know I didn't give you
I
a
was a
chance.
little frazzled when I came
I know
on.
you were a little frazzled, and that's okay. We're very kind here. Anything you want to add?
Yeah, I think it's interesting since my son, he was identified with language learning, speech and language difficulties really young, because my mom's a retired speech pathologist. And I remember going in for the school testing, and they said, oh yeah, if your language is delayed and your speech is delayed, it'll really impact literacy. And then you get into those ARD meetings and you're like, well, how are you going to teach him to summarize? And how are you going to do this? I couldn't get any details on the how to. It's like, we know this is important, but how are we going to do it? And I think that's what even the teachers are, asking. It's like, okay, I know this is important, but where's the how to behind it?
So, my thought from the research was when Trina said, systematically, cumulatively build language over time. And, honestly, that to me is a research nugget right there, because we always think of decoding, doing that systematically, it's cumulative, but we really haven't thought about language. So rather than go into our student outcome now, I want to bring back Trina and Doug. They're waiting patiently.
Oh my God, this is
It's that time. And then we can always circle back. Yes, Judy?
Okay, so guys, this is really incredible. This is the first time on the Literacy View that we're doing this format. This is insane. This is amazing. We're having people pop on, and look, Faith swung her magic wand, and look who magically appeared. It's Trina, back from her honeymoon, and Doug.
We are so happy to have you both back here with us. You were listening. These are real teachers, real parents, real professionals who care about doing the right thing. So we're so happy to have you. Any thoughts about what you heard so far? And then we'll start getting into questions from the people who just joined us. And then some people who are not with us on here, but sent in some thoughts before this episode.
And also the chat is open and people are writing in the chat, so we'll go over that as well.
Okay, cool. Well, I would love to say something. First, thank you for having us back. And I'm sorry if my voice is strained. I was at a conference all weekend, staying up too late, speaking too loudly, and strained my voice. So I'm going to do my best. But I do really want to comment on the fact that teachers are frustrated with the inconsistent research results that trickles down to them. That is 100% valid, 100%. That is absolutely the experience. And I can tell you that is actually the reason why I decided to go back and get my PhD, because I was tired of not having the answers and I was doing everything I could. And by the way, I told you before, I was the queen of oral reading fluency and none of my kids could comprehend what they were reading. So that was the exact motivation. But remember, that was in the year 2006. And so I want to make a point about this. I don't think that it is a teacher's job to exclusively the teacher's job to extrapolate from the research evidence into their classroom, right? Certainly we would want teachers to be reading the research, but the research is really not designed for like the how-to, right? It's designed for the researchers and the scientists to push and pull different levers and figure it out. It's almost like a real debate, like we have to debate amongst ourselves to get to the purest truth, right? And so we may be pushing on all different levers and therefore have different recommendations, but because of our individual research. But it's more important for people who are developing curriculum and assessment tools to be reading that research and comprehensively reading that research that's informing the design of the tools that then would be given to teachers. Okay, so that's the part that gets me frustrated, is that there are publishers, there are designers, assessment developers who should be looking at that research and putting it into tools for you guys, right? Because you already have a hard enough job. You don't need to be curriculum developers and instrument designers too. So when I became a researcher and, given my background and my training, I was able to develop them. That has been my number one goal, is to make the job of teachers and other educators like SLPs easier by giving them the tools that align with all of the research that's available, not just a particular strand of it. And I want to point out that Doug said last time, if somebody's selling you a single strand, they're selling you something, right? And we believe that. We believe knowledge is important. We believe fluency is important. We believe every single piece of that rope is important.
You said, Trina, last time, and I wrote it down for myself because I loved what you said. You said, that's not a problem with the research. It's about the way we interpret it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's where we are now. Poor interpretation. And I feel like it's a game of telephone where, maybe the research design is sound, but by the time it gets into the classroom, and by the time parents are given a message, and by the time administrators try to get things into their building, we've heard 8 different stories. That's what frustrates me.
Mm-hmm.
That it's, there's an expression that numbers don't lie, people do, right? And I don't know if it's a lie or just, again, poor interpretation, but that needs to change. Doug, any thoughts on what you heard from our guests, from us? We want to hear from you something that stood out that you want to just get clarified right off the top.
Yeah. Well, I think that it can be very confusing to get mired into all of the details, and the details do matter, but I just feel like we can get a lot of clarity if we go back to the very basics of something like the simple view. And I know you all might be tired of talking about the simple view of reading, but if you just take a literal interpretation of the simple view of reading, it clarifies so much in that it is both word recognition and language comprehension. And those words are very meaningful. They're not confusing, right? It is literally word recognition times language comprehension that yields reading comprehension. And so the formula helps so much. If you have a student that is struggling with word recognition, then you focus on that. And if you have a student that's struggling with language comprehension, then you focus on that. Now, I know there's a lot of, how do you focus on that? What do you do? That's another thing. But just at that level helps clarify so much, because so many people post on social media that their students they'll say something like, my students are very good at decoding now, but they're really struggling with reading comprehension. And I know I said this last time, but I just feel like it's so important to highlight that that's not the right question. That's not the right question. It's not, how do I help them with reading comprehension anymore? It is, how do I help them with language comprehension? Because they have the word recognition piece in place. I just I know that's simple, and it is a simple view of reading. It is very simple, but it adds a lot of clarity, right? And so then when you ask the question, how do I help my children with language comprehension? It sends you down a totally clear path to focus on language. It's not, now you may not be an expert at that, but then you would obviously say, oh, I need to turn to someone like a speech language pathologist to help me focus on language. And so like once you have that focus honed in, then at least it sends you in the right direction. So I just wanted to say that at first. And I also just want to say one other thing. I really appreciate how well you all think about these things so carefully and clearly. I just, I'm sitting here, I was in the backstage just listening, and I just appreciated how much you care about this topic. And because you care so much about it, it is going to help change the lives of so many children. So those are my thoughts at first. I have many other thoughts. I have lots of thoughts, Trina, about reading fluency, and I can't wait to talk.
Wait, we can't go there yet.
I know, we got to wait.
Can I have permission to say one other thing that I think is very critical to the rest of the conversation? Okay. Are you guys okay? Can I have that permission? Thanks, Faith and Judy. Okay, this is what I would need to say. Yes, the how is critical, but the question that we have to put before the how is when. And I'm saying this because the more and more I thought about why we're having troubles building reading comprehension, I realize it's because everyone talks about alphabet knowledge, phonological awareness, decoding, and fluency as the foundation, the foundational literacy skills. And I hate to tell you all, but that is just wrong. Oral language is the foundation of all literacy. And you cannot build those things like alphabet knowledge, phonological awareness, decoding without oral language. And if you think about oral language as the foundational skills and the decoding skills as pivotal, they help pivot children from oral language to written language, which is necessary, but it also helps them go back and forth, right? They're the pivotal skills, not the foundational skills. They need oral language early, foundationally, and continually developing it. And if you understand that oral language needs to be developed early and continuously, and that you can't just like push a pause on it while you're working on these other early literacy skills, then you actually do focus on oral language earlier. And we don't wait until they're in the 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade, and they're struggling then because they're missed all of that oral language that they could and should have had as the foundation for that later, more complex comprehension of academic material.
Can I chime in?
Yeah.
Thank you for saying that. I think so many of us in the field need that reminder, because I'll very often get teachers that are so frustrated, especially in the K-2 bracket. There's emergencies. We have a lot of kids that can't read, and they almost seem desperate to just focus on the foundational skills portion of their literacy block. And sometimes they don't understand how important the other part of their block is. And it's a good reminder of why that's important and why we shouldn't wait till 3rd, 4th, or 5th grade to pay attention to that. Even I've been guilty of that. I'm like, oh my God, why can't we do more of this?
I agree with that, but I want to emphasize my point is that we shouldn't postpone oral language instruction in preschool,
right,
in 1st and 2nd grade.
Exactly.
Right? We shouldn't replace it with more decoding instruction. That is a bad move.
And that's the problem, though. A lot of people are so desperate because a lot of the kids are struggling with decoding to just want to spend all their time on that. And I'm glad that you're reiterating that message, that that's not.
And the solution is to absolutely teach the code skills better and teach the oral language better.
So I have a question that came to me through Messenger, and it was from Angela Shelton. She is one of our listeners, and she wrote, "Hi, Faith. I've been a long-term listener, first-time poster. I loved this episode, and she put it in caps, but left feeling a bit defeated. My school has adopted CKLA for next year, and I was super excited. Now I'm skeptical that it won't be enough, and I feel like I don't have the tools to teach language comprehension. I have used the cubed, that's the assessment, and believe it gives great data, but where do I go from here? I'm hoping for more practical teacher moves in your follow-up discussion. Thank you for all you do. So thanks, Angela, for sending in that question. So where do we go from here? And I think a lot of our listeners felt this is great information, but it left them feeling like, now what? So I would like both of you to kind of give your recommendations. And if we can make it as practical as possible, that would be great.
Yeah, we can do that. So this is a very smart teacher. Obviously, she is or he is very right about this, that focusing on just one strand will not be enough. They are right. And if they focus on the lower strands of word recognition and then a single strand of background knowledge, it will not be adequate. So what do? Well, you focus on all of the strands. How do you do that? Well, the amazing thing about language is that when you use language, and you have children produce language, they are using all of the strands. That language is an integrated process where all of the strands are integrated together. So the process to help these children is to get them to produce language and not just answer questions or not just talk about vocabulary and not just talk about content, but to actually put the whole thing together. And there's a lot of research in the field of speech language pathology on how to do that. And believe it or not, it actually looks like structured literacy. So how do you do that? Trina, I want you to field that because we've been working on that forever, but the how do you do it? That's what they want to know. Like, what do you actually do?
Okay, I'm going to answer that, but you know how it's like sitting here, I have something else I need to say. One of the reasons why Doug and I work together is we edit for each other. Okay. One of the things that I wanted him to say in his response was that it's really about the monologic discourse level language, what he was saying. That's different when you're talking about conversation or even dialogue. Because if you're only doing words and sentences and not a monologic telling of something, your language doesn't need to be as complex. Okay,
Yeah.
so it's actually very important that you get to that discourse level. I heard, I think, so I don't know who it was before, they were saying just getting kids to talk more rather than responding to questions was the key. Getting them to retell the information. And I'm actually going to pivot now to the answer to this person's question. So let's say she's got the CKLA curriculum. It's got a ton of really great content, let's say, right? There's really good content, but their teaching procedures may not get children to be able to give a discourse monologic retelling of that content. That's what the teacher can do. That's what you can do
So
right
are
there.
you saying, so I'm going to interrupt you now.
Yeah.
Are you saying those teacher procedures, dare I say strategies? Is that what you're saying? That maybe the content is there, but they don't have the structure, the strategies to get kids to talk enough? Is that what I'm hearing?
Okay, maybe that's a little piece of it, but I would rather say that while they're so focused on the knowledge building, they forget to build the language that they need, that children need to be able to acquire and produce that knowledge. And I think I mentioned in the last one that if you're given a passage and you do not understand 80% of it, you're not building knowledge, you're just drowning, right? So you've got to build the language to be able to even understand that content. And so one of the ways to build the knowledge needed is take a shorter paragraph from the CKLA curriculum. Okay, so there's a huge passage. It's like, 10 paragraphs and it's meant to be a read aloud. But what would be better is to take one of those paragraphs that has some really good, important information, maybe 2 or 3 critical content or vocabulary, maybe domain-specific words that they really need to learn and practice, and have the children practice retelling that information to a friend, right? Or somebody can come up to the front and retell that past that paragraph. Then another kid retells the next paragraph, and another kid tells the next paragraph. More responding, the better, okay? But not just answering questions about that paragraph. Allowing them to put it into monologic, discourse level expression, because only then do you get all of the complex relations between the sentences, which is actually where the comprehension is, not in the events themselves. Comprehension is in the relation between the events. And when you are producing discourse level language, you have to lengthen your sentences. You automatically start using subordinate clauses and relative pronouns, right? So you can use this strategy of converting something that is like dialogic or responsive to questions into something more fruitful, constructive, and comprehension language building around the content that the curriculum is already trying to teach.
All right, Trina, I'm sorry. I gotta ask you something. Can you break it down and simplify it for me? That's a lot of information you just gave me. I processed some of it, but not all of it. So I need you to break it down even simpler for what that means in my classroom tomorrow.
Okay, let me help,
He's got to edit me.
we edit each other. So the amazing Carol Westby.
Can I just ask something? Was I the only one that wanted deeper clarification? It's only me.
Yeah, I mean, I've been through the Story Champs training, and so I've got that background. But no, Judy, I wanted more clarification.
Okay, good. Thank
Well,
you.
let me just call on the amazing Carol Westby for a moment. We can channel her absolute brilliance. In the mid 80s, she had a revelation that she shared with all of us, that narratives, storytelling, is a bridge from oral language to written language. And the reason why is because when you tell a story, you are telling someone about something that they were not there to witness. And when you do that, you have to paint the world with your words. And in order to do that, you're not being complex for the sake of being complex. You have to use very specific vocabulary and more complex syntax that uses causal and temporal relations, and those result in subordinate clauses that yield more complex language. You are just simply forced to talk like a book when you are telling a story. And also when you are describing something or doing one of the discourse genres for expository, same exact thing. Explaining to someone how to do something or describing something. It requires precise, what we call complex language. I don't really think there's such a thing as complex language, really, by the way. Language is not more or less complex, nor are vocabulary words more or less complex. They're just more or less frequently used. So if we actually create a system where children have to use that language all day long, this is the language that we use. We're telling stories, we're using expository language, and it forces us to talk like a book. Then it's not a shock to their system when the language, which is written down in that complex form, is the same language as what they're used to hearing and using all the time. You don't have the 4th grade slump anymore. It's not a shock to them. It's like, oh, I am familiar with this register. So that's why, and I should have. You're right, Trina. I appreciate you amending my comments, because I should have honed in on narrative discourse and expository discourse, because we're not trying to help children improve their conversational skills. I mean, that is a good thing to do, but that will not help them improve their ability to understand the complex language that's written in a book. It is improving their complex oral language. And can I just make one more thing, just real fast? I just want to say that when Trina says that language is foundational, I almost want to push against that, Trina. in that, or like you say, oral language is foundational. I'm just like, oral language is just what it is. And written language is even oral language. Now, I know that sounds crazy and people push hard, but I dare you to read a passage and not convert it to oral language in your mind. And I dare you to write something and not say it either out loud or in your mind. You say it before you write it. It is still oral language. And so it's not just foundational. That is literally what we're talking about. Now, that might be going too far, Trina. Did I make you uncomfortable?
No. And I actually want to punctuate it with a clarification around the statement that I think teachers have heard this, that written language is far more complex than oral language. And Phil Capon responded with that, suggesting that good comprehension instruction used text. And that requires a little nuance. And what Doug was saying is that some types of oral language could be less complex, which would be more conversational, right? But narration and exposition, regardless of whether it's oral or written, is a lot more complex than conversation. And sometimes that's used as an excuse to not do oral language interventions in spirit of reading comprehension. And it's just a flat out misnomer or misunderstanding of what language really is. So written language is also oral language, and you cannot write what you cannot say. So build what you can say so you can write. And then the same on the comprehension side, right? You cannot understand what you read unless you understand what you hear.
Okay, so now I'm putting on my teacher cap because one, I'm thinking about as a coach what I would say, but I'm putting on my teacher cap and I'm listening to this. And let's say I have a class of 30 kids and I want to build oral language. Reasonably, how does this look in a classroom situation? You gave some examples before about, maybe one person turning to a partner and doing a retell that way, or calling somebody up to the room and retelling something. But whole class, the teacher wants to make sure she or he is getting kids to talk. So number one, how do we do this whole class? Number two, how do you do informal assessment whole class to make sure that, they're doing what you expect them to do? And number three, how do you intervene whole class? If I'm a teacher, what are you doing to stimulate conversation, get them to produce more, better quality of language? So I know I threw a lot out, but I think putting on my teacher cap, that's what a lot of teachers are thinking. I have this program, I'm required to teach it, I have to do this, and yet I know that oral language is the foundation. I hear what Doug and Trina are saying, but reasonably, what do I do here?
Okay, so I have so much to say about this, Faith, so much. And I actually really do have answers for the teachers who are thinking that, right? It is absolutely possible. We've demonstrated it many, many times in our research. And there are videos. And if you want to look examples up YouTube, just Story Champs large group, you can watch it happen. Okay. But this is actually where it's very important for curriculum developers or researchers like us, like I would say literacy scientists like us, who also have a deep understanding of the learning sciences, to be able to create the lessons that make it easy for a teacher to do with her large group. Now, intervention at a large group level we know that's going to be really difficult, but that's why we have multi-tiered systems, right? And if you know anything about Story Champs, it has been designed from the very beginning as a multi-tiered program, because we know that even if in that class of 30 kids, you're going to have a huge variability in their language abilities, maybe less variability in kindergarten and first grade classroom related to their decoding skills, but language is going to be huge variability, a huge range, right? So you have to be able to deliver it in a way that's like multi-tiered. You've got to attend to the needs of the majority of the students using the most economical modality possible, and that would be in a large group instruction. And then you have to monitor properly to be able to identify the children who are not making the same gains and that are going to benefit from something in small group and give them something more intensive that would supplement what they would get in large group. Now, of course, that has been our entire research career. How do we do that in these large groups? Now, I'm not a speech language pathologist, Doug is, and a lot of SLPs used to work one-on-one with children and could do all these fancy interventions, right? Well, for the most part, their caseloads are so high, they're at minimum working with kids in groups, even if they're high support needs. So over time, as the things work or has evolved, they even need things in larger groups, right? But I have always had a focus on general education and the teachers. And that's the reason why we've never just catered to SLP's needs. So what's available in the classroom, I've worked with a lot of Head Start teachers, and they'll tell me, this works, this doesn't work, right? Or I do it myself. I figure out what works, what doesn't work. So in Story Champs, what you get is about 16 years of tried and true procedures at the large group, whole class, small group, and one-on-one. Now, again, I could tell you our process. We model a story. Step one, we model a story. And the stories are created with complex language, words, sentences, and discourse patterns. So they're strategically written so they mimic what you would, the complexity of language that they would be given in a book, like a children's book, like you would read to them. By the way, I love dialogic reading too. I did that and I still do that. But this is an extra. This is like a more powerful 1-2 punch. You've only got 30 minutes. What the heck are you going to do to improve everybody's language? This is going to be your 1-2 punch. All right. So you use a specially constructed story that has all of those linguistic patterns, words, sentences, and discourse that you need children to learn. Okay, so you're modeling it and they're practicing retelling. So we model the story. I talk about the parts. We do the pieces. This is character, problem filling, action, ending. We do some gestures. There is a section of comprehension questions, but those WH questions are really part of the scaffolding to build them towards independent monologic retelling of that story. Okay, and then when there is a turn for them to do it, for them to retell, I first have kids all do it together. So I would say like this. I would say, what problem did he have in this story? And I would get everyone to make a silent response, not an oral response. And I would get everyone to put an answer in your head, bubble in your mouth, your hands in your lap. That's how I say it with preschoolers. Okay. So I am telling them, I want everybody to think of this, and they don't know who I'm going to call on. So that increases their active participation even subvocally. And then I call on somebody and they give me an answer. I repeat it and then have the entire class repeat it with me. Great. He crashed on his bike. Everyone say that with me. He crashed on his bike. So group responding, everybody said that. And I go through each of the pieces in order. Now they've all said that story in pieces. Now I say, now it's your turn to tell it to your partner. Listen to me one more time. I retell the story so they've got a clear, cohesive model. And now I split them up, and with some monitoring tools called Champ Checks, that's the way we do it, but it's a version of class-wide peer tutoring. And they tell each other the story. And because they have been taught these pieces, their peer partner is able to help them when they are struggling. They use the icons, they use some of the visuals to help each other get it done. Now, that is going to take care of the majority of the kids in the classes oral language needs, that procedure, not totally. Let me just say that model of a lesson. Okay, they need more than just that piece, but that's how I would deliver it in a whole group. And the children who, after several lessons, are not making as many gains, I would do it in a small group with them. But the model, like break it apart, put it back together. It's called whole part whole instruction. And then there's a very specific sequence of activities to build towards independence. And those are consistent regardless of the arrangement of large, small, or individual.
And I want to say that just to simplify it, and this is grossly simplifying it, but it is going to be so familiar to teachers. It is this idea, very grossly, of I do, you do, we do. Okay, that's
But
happening.
explicit instruction is much more than that.
Yeah, I've said grossly simplified. And then also the thing that's unique about language, though, is it does whole part whole. It puts the language in context, and that's really important. So there are entire books about contextualized language intervention coming out of speech language pathology, because that's how children learn language, is when it's in a meaningful communication context. So like Trina said, the whole is the story. This is the whole, this is the language that we're modeling for you. Let's hone in on a specific target. Trina was modeling, by the way, honing in on story grammar. And now let's put it back together again. And the procedures that are used are so similar to what people use with explicit systematic phonics instruction. The only difference is that with phonics instruction, it's a synthetic approach, but with language instruction, it's a contextualized approach. Those are the key differences. So what teachers learn about systematic, explicit, cumulative, and diagnostic phonics instruction, they can 100% apply to their language instruction, just make it contextualized.
Whoops, I'm cheering.
Mhm.
That was powerful, really powerful. Let's turn this over to our guests who we have on with us. We have Laura, Brittany, and Beth, and then we have people in the chat. So I think
The chat is going wild, Faith.
I know. Let's get the people who are on with us first, and then we'll go to the chat. Beth, as a parent, anything that you have, like a pressing question that you would want to put out there from the parent perspective?
Well, I not a question, but I went through the Story Champs training. I do have to say the YouTube videos are amazing. And Megan was in charge of the training. She's like, any support, any help you need. And one of the first stories that I asked my, son to retell, and then at the end he gets to tell his own story of tell me about a time when something like that happened to you. And I about fell out of my chair. It was just, what he told me was remarkable. But the feedback component, I had to go back and look at the YouTube videos about how you give feedback, because the first time I gave my son feedback about like a story component he left out, or maybe it was like a temporal connection, he did not like the way I gave the feedback. So I go back into the manual and I go look at the videos, because again, you have a kid that's been in therapy since he was like 2 or 3, and he's had a lot of feedback in his life. But when I give it the right way, he's able to accept it. But yeah, I just no questions. I'm interested in hearing everybody else's questions, but yeah, thank you all for all that you do and allowing me to be here tonight.
Thank you, Beth.
It's a pleasure having you. Laura, any question, thought, something you want to ask Trina and Doug?
Yes. One question I have is, how do you get buy-in from administrators or districts where they see the elements of the reading rope or the simple view, and they look at the basal and they say, well, it has all those components, but then the results still aren't there. The teachers are still frustrated. Like, how do you get that mind shift from decision makers to understand that it's more than just a box to check?
I love that question.
It's such a good question. First of all,
I don't think we have the answers, though, Doug.
I know that it doesn't take that much time for administrators to understand what we're saying, because it's been out there so long that oral language is language, is literacy, is language. It's crucial. It's beyond crucial. It is what we're talking about. We are talking about building language in one form or another, written, oral, whatever, don't care. We're building language. It doesn't take that long to get administrators to understand that at all, of course. But understanding that it can't just be something that looks good, that's shiny, that people say is good, but you actually have to understand what we just talked about it being explicit, systematic, cumulative, diagnostic. You've got to ask that question. Is there frequent student responding? Is that happening a lot, or is it a lot of teacher talk? And if it's a lot of teacher talk, it is not following structured literacy, what we know about evidence-based instruction. So I think we just kind of need to get back to the very basic questions. Does it really follow these principles of instruction that are very beautifully outlined by the International Dyslexia Association? I mean, that's my take, but I'm not, I don't know. I need Leslie. Leslie's in here. Leslie knows how to communicate with all the administrators better than any of us, I think, or at least me.
So I actually think that we have this question too, Laura, because I think it would be easier for teachers to be able to implement these things if their administrators or their curriculum directors were making amazing choices in terms of adoption, and to know this very well when they're going into it. But even sometimes, like, sources that you guys all trust or that everyone trusts don't maybe know of what is possible. And I do feel like the work that Doug and I do is somewhat unique. It's not built on unique information. It's built on the same information that many people have, and many other people are doing oral language things. But one of the things that we have been able to do is really create that explicit, systematic, cumulative kind of instruction. But we're not building a full comprehensive ELA program, right? Because that's not what's needed. What's needed is this piece inserted, boom, right? And like for CKLA, Story Champs would be a wonderful companion to CKLA, right? But you should do it before third grade, right? Start it in preschool, kindergarten, first grade, and continue to use the teaching strategies or the teaching procedures that we use in Story Champs, carry that over to the other content. And that would be our hope. Less than 30 minutes a day, maybe 3 to 5 times a week, would get you in those early grades of something like Story Champs would probably be sufficient.
But here's
Yeah.
what I'm thinking. That sounds great. And what you're saying is important. But realistically, in a school, they've heard these things before. If you only add in this,
Mhm.
if you only add in that, if you only do 10 minutes of this, if you only do 20 minutes of that, and before you know it, the whole day is just
You might,
up.
yeah, and you might end up getting the F-bomb.
Yeah.
I get it.
And that,
I know.
Judy, that's exactly what I was thinking, Judy.
Because my teachers are fed up with me already, because
Yeah.
today they have to do a geode and they have to do it whole class, and tomorrow they have to plan
know.
this. They are fed up. And the other thing is, it sounds like, we're not getting enough information about our kids with, maybe screeners. Do we have to do a language screener? Do we have to do comprehension screeners? How much more data can we collect, and how much more can we interpret what to do with it? We have so much data, and I kind of know what to do with my data, but a lot of people are just so overwhelmed already. How do we navigate through it? It's very overwhelming. And I know that my teachers are fed up. And sometimes, I'll walk into a classroom and they're excellent educators, and I could tell, and I don't want to talk about my own school because that's not professional, but like in general, people are sometimes winging it because they just can't do more than they're doing already. So how do we make them feel successful? And then the other thing is, okay, you might be using a core curriculum like HMH or core knowledge or expeditionary learning and wit and wisdom. And now there's the suggestion, oh, look at this or look at that. But people are barely able to look at what they already have. And now you're asking them potentially to look at something else. That's very overwhelming. People have families, kids, things to do. And like, even I'm frustrated.
Right. That's the same reason I'm not reinventing all of those other things, is I also have a family. I can only get you the upper strands of Scarborough's rope in a structured literacy way.
So we are not suggesting that if only you add this strand or only if you add this strand. We are saying if you do the whole thing, word recognition and language comprehension together, then you will get reading comprehension. So it's not just do phonemic awareness for 10 minutes or focus on knowledge. That's what you've got to do. Or focus on syntax. It is the integration of those things, which is beautifully done with language. You can integrate them efficiently with narrative and expository discourse. And now it's not pie in the sky to say, unless everyone's simple view of reading, Scarborough's rope, Duke and Cartwright, unless they're completely wrong, it's not crazy to say that if you focus on all of those strands, you will have students perform much better in reading comprehension. That is, or all of those theories are completely wrong and we should ignore them. And a literal interpretation of those theories would be disastrous. And I don't think that's the case. I think they will yield reading comprehension. And as far as assessment, I want to say, Judy, our teachers are not drowning in information on students' language. The kindergarten teachers, first grade teachers, for the most part, have zero formal information on their students' ability to understand and produce complex language. They get great info on phonemic awareness, letter names, letter sounds. They literally don't have any information. So we're calling just for, can we get some information?
You're 100% right. I think it's critical. And I think it's crazy that many of us are not collecting enough of that information. And I think that, it really brings to mind that so many people have been talking about dyslexia, which we know a lot of kids may have dyslexia or show signs of vulnerability, but there's so many other things that may be going on with our kids as well. And we might be missing the boat if we don't get that information. Doug.
I want to share one more thing to the question, the pushback. It's appropriate pushback. We get it all the time, right? And I hate doing it too. But it's really about, like, when, let's say you did something like this and instead of adding it on, you have to replace something, right? Because the hope would be that what we're suggesting is better than what is happening right now. And in many cases in our research, we are actually comparing where our treatment classrooms are literally replacing 30 minutes a day, 3 times a week of their regular curriculum for comprehension instruction with story champs. And we get phenomenal effects, even on state level tests, okay? Or even compared to ELA programs that use retelling as one of their procedures, right? We can get that. But let me tell you about this one study where we were working with 36 first grade teachers. And as part of the study, they were given the curriculum, supported. It was quite easy. They didn't require a bunch of coaching sessions. They didn't attend a bunch of training, and they did the curriculum for their entire first grade. We followed the kids till like the middle of second grade. And what we saw was that the children improved all of the skills that we were collecting, including writing and reading comprehension, out in the second grade. But that wasn't the most important outcome to me. It was 5 years later when I went back and asked them how many of those first grade teachers were still using the curriculum. Guess what the answer was? All of them plus some, because they had shared it and they had asked for the program. So usually we have a hard time getting things to maintain in practice after research. 5 years later, they are all still using it, and even additional teachers that were hired since were also provided the curriculum and using it. So that is telling you, if it works, they will do it.
Yes.
Wait, so explain to me, Trina. So is it free and is it available to everybody? Like, what would I do tomorrow? Like, I haven't really looked at the tools yet. I haven't had the opportunity to do that. What would I do tomorrow? Like, say I want to become really strong at teaching strategies, right? Maybe the core curriculum that my school has selected is doing a crappy job with teaching kids, or not even showing how to explicitly model that. Where would I go? What would I do in order to make sure that I'm teaching summarizing in the best way possible, or different, items relating to comprehension? Because our lessons in the programs that have been unfortunately selected, that's what they do. Today it's your learning, and we can't change that. Today's character traits, tomorrow's summarization, today is text features, Thursday is again summarization, then it's point of view. How am I going to navigate given those circumstances that I'm going to do the best job possible given that? That's what my principal might be wanting to see that day. That's what you're teaching today, Judy. Now I want to know I'm doing it well, and my core curriculum might not be showing me how to do that well, or to show the kids how to do it well.
I know you asked Trina that question. Can I just say this? What Trina is describing is research that we've been doing for about 20 years. And it is all published in peer-reviewed journals. And we've even written pieces on step-by-step how to do it. The procedures are very outlined in the research. And we even have tutorials that are like 10 principles of narrative-based language intervention, how to do it. Now, any teacher can take that, read it, and implement it. But of course, there are stories that we've constructed. And Trina didn't mention this, but the stories increase in complexity over time because this is a cumulative and systematic approach, right? And so you would have to do that as well in constructing the stories, making everything systematic and cumulative and so forth. And if you can do it and you have the time to do it, then go for it. It is all out there for you. But we learned a long time ago that is not an approach a lot of schools want. They want it put together. And so that is where, so my wife is a graphic designer, and so she's designed all of this for us and created this thing that we call Story Champs. So it is essentially our research in the flesh that can be, distributed. And of course that costs money to print all of that and make all of that. But the concepts, the principles, those are all free for anyone to read and to understand.
Mm-hmm.
Excellent. Brittany, do you have a question, a thought? I don't think we got to you in terms of giving you a chance to ask your question.
Yeah. One question. I've got a notebook full. I think one of them was just answered. And I know earlier Laura had mentioned, and I was agreeing with her about, that vertical alignment. And I think it was Doug that just said, that it's kind of cumulative and, it kind of gets more complex. And so that was what I was thinking, like, is this a K2 thing? Like, we're really trying to build language comprehension, or is this something that continues, and then just becomes more complex? I'm just thinking of, Judy had just mentioned like state testing, and you'd mentioned state testing. I'm thinking about the questions that my students see in second grade on our end of the year testing. And I'm wondering, which, by the way, after the episode, I went on to Story Champs. I downloaded what I could. I started implementing story grammar in my classroom the next day, and I've seen a huge improvement in my kids' language that I didn't even know was possible because I wasn't giving them the opportunity, right? Because I was just doing what my book told me to do, and it was a lot of teacher led. But I'm wondering is if enough of that instruction and 30 minutes a day of just reading those stories to kids and having them use that story grammar to retell it, is that preparing them for seeing those crazy complex questions at the end of the year that, I like to think that I like to do what's best for kids no matter what, right? But essentially I'm evaluated as whether I'm a effective teacher or not based on their scores on that end of the year test. And I don't know if our conversations, the language that we shared, when I was doing that story grammar with them, really did prepare them enough for those questions. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense, Brittany. I have a couple of comments. First of all, several years ago, I did a webinar that's recorded and it's still on Language Dynamics Group's website. If you go way down, and it says how to beat high stakes tests. And I unpack some of those tests and the language things that are in there. And then I deconstruct it and talk about the words, the sentences, and the discourse level that you have to understand in order to be able to do those tests. Okay. And all of those concepts are things that we're talking about here. So, and I'm going to integrate this a little bit with Judy's comment about strategies. The Story Champs approach builds all the strands of Scarborough's rope, the upper strands of Scarborough's rope, in a very integrated way. We would not set aside a strategy and say, we're teaching this strategy. They learn the strategies in an integrated way. How to use verbal reasoning, that's one of the strands, right? But you use that verbal reasoning to use you use the clues in the stories or passages to figure out the meaning of the words that you don't know. So the lessons would give practice doing that. We also would work on things like figurative language, morphological analysis, and some other things that, I know what polysemous words or multiple meaning words, which are very common in those high stakes tests. They'll say, read this like couple sentences and try to figure out the definition of this word, but it's a polysemous word. It has more than one meaning. And if we have not taught the strategy of using the clues in the other words or in the sentences that are nearby, they're not going to be able to figure out the definition of that word in this context, because everything is contextualized. Remember everything. Now, and I'm suggesting that if we work on oral language intensely and intentionally in a systematic way from preschool to second grade, they are likely no longer going to need intensive strategy instruction. And they will likely have the oral language abilities to be able to do CKLA or acquire knowledge and express it in a meaningful way. But if we do not give them those skills that really do lay the foundation for those later higher order academic repertoires, then throwing a strategy at them is only going to give them like this much of a bump. If they don't have the language, if they don't understand the language and can't produce the language, a strategy is not going to be much help, right? And it's the same way with knowledge. Knowing about something, but can't understand it when it's in a long sentence or in a complicated exposition isn't going to help if they don't know the language that goes with that content, right?
Brittany,
Can I add an anecdote that we were cleaning out our book closet, and we found, like at the end of the school year, and we found a book that was STAR in Texas is our state test. And it was for 4th and 5th graders. And it was a book of multiple choice passages that were all around themes of, it was time and place, family structures, overcoming obstacles, and making friends. And so when you think about the impact that a solid K through 2 oral language program could provide, like those topics become places that require remediation if they're not explicitly taught.
Yes, 100%.
Yeah. And I just wanted to just back to Brittany just for a moment, and thank you, Laura. That's such a great anecdote. Brittany, I feel like you're asking, if we focus on word recognition and we focus on language comprehension, will that really result in improvements in students' performance and reading comprehension on high stakes tests? I cannot tell you. I don't know what else would. If and I know I keep going back to very basics. If the simple view is in any way accurate, then the answer is going to be yes. If you focus on both of those major areas and all of the strands, if we go to Scarborough, then what else would improve their ability to understand what they read? It has to. Now, here's where it's going to fall apart. If you just teach them content about specific content, and then when they get to the high stakes test, none of that content is on the high stakes test, then you're right. You will get 0 because content does not transfer to other content. You will not get.
Excuse me? Could you say that one more time?
Well,
I'm going to say reading comprehension is not domain specific.
I do have a BS button.
Yeah, well, I'll say it
There's
again.
a lot of BS flying around. So I'm going to press that for anyone who does not get that.
Yeah, so it's true that content doesn't transfer to other content. Now, what does, though, is the strategy of learning to make connections.
Mm-hmm.
That's what transfers, right?
Yeah, and the structure of sentences and like the ability to infer, like those things transfer. They're sorry, I interrupted, but I like have to say this, right? Reading comprehension is a generalized language repertoire, right? And we want students to be able to comprehend an unfamiliar passage, an unfamiliar book. Like, then we have to give them the ability to make sense of new material always. I
Yeah.
mean, Judy, you made those points really clear in the last, I don't know, the episode before. And I was like, way to go, Judy. That was so, so good.
Mhm.
Oh my God, Trina, that's so cool that you just
you
gave me
really
a
did.
compliment.
And Catherine,
You did. And you were, I'm sorry, you were even challenging the whole, like, who gets to decide what knowledge gets taught? That
It
is a
gets on my
big deal.
nerves. It
It
gets on my
does.
nerves because a lot of these topics aren't really a big part of the students' lives where I work or the kids that I work with. Like, how do you know what's important in their lives or what's meaningful to them? Yes, there is knowledge that we should all have. We all know that, but let's not ignore specific things that are really important to kids where they're at
yeah,
and what's
and
important to them.
And if you subscribe to the Duke and Cartwright model, there's motivation integrated into there.
Right.
So it's required. So as we're making kids read material, if they haven't chosen what they're reading about, we could
That's
be like
so-
reducing their reading comprehension right there.
Yes, and I will agree with that 1,000%. And that's why I am so happy that a lot of people have been watching the Literacy View, and I know a lot of those screeners are finally working on those passages. Some of those passages that are used in those screeners are older than me, and I'm 50 years old. Let's get those passages updated. Let's make them more meaningful to our students, because a lot of our students cannot relate to that content at all. So thank you for listening. Wouldn't it be wonderful if those passages sometimes related to things that are meaningful in the lives of kids now, right? The world is evolving. The world is changing.
Ironically, Judy, that's what we do in Story Champs. The content is what we call personally themed or personally realistic or realistic fictional. So they're all personal theme stories so that kids will go, hey, wait, that happened to me. They're interested because it's about their lives. So we use those things to motivate them to want to talk, which they do. They increase their volume. And then while they're increasing their volume, completely self-started because they want to talk about it, then we shape and model complex language for them to use. All right.
And that would increase their written volume as well.
And we have many studies that shows that that approach, what I just talked about, transfers to writing outcomes without teaching writing.
we thought that
I
that
was
was
gonna
going to
ask
be a
that.
stretch. Yeah,
I was going to ask something too.
in our first
We're all
studies
getting
that we
excited
did-
on here.
Well, I just want to say that in the first studies that we did with this, where all we did was focus on oral language in the intervention, and then we used writing as an outcome, Trina and I were kind of trepidatious about it. We were like, ooh, what's going to happen? And the transfer was perfect. It's like if you teach a child to talk in complex language and they know how to transcribe, that's important, right? Transcription you have to do, but if they can transcribe it, then they can write in the same complexity. And so they just talk, they write the way they talk. So you increase the complexity of their talking, the complexity of their writing increases also.
But Doug, can I challenge you on that? In K-2, I very often see a disconnect between what they can read versus what they can write and what they could articulate. Sometimes, it's not it doesn't totally match. For the early ages, writing usually takes a little longer to develop those spelling patterns, to develop those,
But those are
writing those details.
But those are code skills that you're talking about. It's the transcription and the handwriting, right?
And
That's
also
what-
No, but it's also knowing how to, articulate your ideas,
Yeah,
how to
well,
write
that
a topic sentence, how to write
that's
a
what I'm saying.
sentence, details, and all of that.
But Judy, that's the exact kind of thing that Story Champs or what we're talking about, working on this oral language stuff, would do. It would help them be able to put a story together in a logical sequence. And that, what if they can do that orally through intervention or instruction on that, it transfers to writing as long as they have a sufficient transcription skill.
And time out just for a second, Judy, I want to say you are 100% right here, that it is a lot easier to listen to and to understand complex language often than it is to produce it if you're never asked to produce it. And this is an interesting thing. The people who have to tell stories all the time and produce this complex language, that's not difficult for them. But it's interesting. It's not enough. It's not enough to just listen to it.
Okay. I need to challenge you again, Doug. I'm sorry, I'm getting a little crazy. All right, so sometimes you'll see reading lessons happen in a classroom. Is it not enough to just have an oral discussion? Do we always have to have an artifact? Because some principals always want a written artifact. Can't we ever have a lesson where we see if kids are understanding because they're verbally having those oral language discussions and stuff? Do we always have to have an quote unquote, as principals call it, artifacts?
No. The oral language is an artifact also. And if you're teaching them to talk in complex sentences and with complex vocabulary, quote unquote complex, then if you teach them to do that and they can produce it, then they can also produce it in written form, because language is language. And if you're going to write it, just think about this. If you're going to write something, you're going to sit down and write something right now, and I ask you to write a story about something that happened to you, you go through that process. You are literally saying it to yourself before you write it down. You are talking. We can't hear you, but you are talking. And so if children can talk like that, then they can write like that. That's crucial. The problem is that so often we don't have them producing the language. They listen to it. They listen to people tell them stories and read books to them. And that gets you only so far. You don't learn a language by only listening to it. That, full stop. You do not learn a language by only listening to it. And we are literally teaching them a language in a sense. We're teaching them a register.
And the preschool teachers that I work with, they do audio recordings and give it to their things.
That's funny that you say that, Trina. We just had Mary in the chat say have them record their response on whatever devices the class uses. That equals artifacts.
That's great, MT. That's great. Yeah.
So I'm glad you
wait, Faith, let me just say something. So just so everybody on here sees the chat, I don't know if you guys see it. If you're on full screen right now, you won't see it, but the chat's been open the whole time. If you get yourself off of full screen, you'll all be able to scroll through, respond, and so forth.
So we have Sherry Lucas Hall on, and she was our guest before, and she's been commenting through this whole conversation. And she's a teacher and she tutors, and she's like, you know what? I'm just learning that now. We can't teach what we don't know. And she's like, I'm doing this with my 3-year-old grandchild. And that's the whole thing. Even the most experienced people, it's like they're hearing this for the first time, or maybe they've heard it, but they never heard it with such detail. I think that we all knew that oral language was important, but I think people just really didn't know, well, what do you do with that? That's why we're having this conversation. Emily Smith has a question for you. What are thoughts on the accuracy of NWEA map growth assessments? They are not great for guiding instruction, but are they accurate? Do you know anything about that could answer that question?
I can't speak to that. I don't know those assessments well enough, and they were not in use when I was in the schools. So
I know a little bit about the MAP assessment, and it's a computer adaptive test, and they use, I think, RIT scores for that, if I remember right. I don't know how well it measures language. I don't know. It's a good question, but we could find that out. It's not that hard to dig into the technical manual and examine the construct validity of that test and to see how they measure language or even if they measure it at all, I actually don't know. So we can find that out and get back to you about
So
it.
I would almost ask the question. I mean, it's a different question, but I would encourage teachers to say, is this information useful to me in making classroom decisions about what I should be teaching, how much I should be teaching, where I should emphasize, do I need to make modifications? If they're instructionally relevant assessment results. Because if they are not instructionally relevant assessment results, then potentially that's one of the things you should reconsider, right? Because that just makes your job harder, not easier. You need meaningful data that informs instruction.
So there's a question here from Holly Mannheim, and it is visualization. Does it rewire the brain? That's an interesting way to put it.
Oh, actually, I've been reading a bit about this, actually. So there's some really good neuroscience evidence that listening and speaking have neural coupling. Okay, what that means is that let me see, let me make sure I can interpret this right. Is that when we hear ourselves reading, let's say, or hear ourselves speaking, okay, or hear somebody else reading and speaking, it actually activates more of our brain than when we're not hearing it, okay? And that when we are comprehending something, we actually comprehend with the resource of our expressive language. And when we speak, we actually speak with the resource of our comprehension. Okay. So there are some really good, like, they're not exactly like easy to put into practice in classrooms, but I have a keynote talk that I give all the time about the neuroscience and the learning science undergirding this oral storytelling. And because that listening and speaking, so I'm just going to make this note. Sometimes people argue because listening and speaking, because humans can acquire listening and speaking without explicit instruction, they say we don't have to, which is often the case. It's often been used as an argument for not needing to do what we're suggesting. And in fact, our approach is the exact opposite. And I think neuroscience would also back this up, saying that if we use listening and speaking, we actually have greater impacts because of the way it activates the brain. More areas of the brain get activated during a listening and speaking task, right? And so our approach is to leverage listening and speaking to build reading and writing, as opposed to like treating it so totally different. I don't know that I answered the question.
Well, yeah, what about visualizing? So to my understanding, and I'm actually repeating what another researcher has told me, but it is my understanding that there is actually very limited research supporting the idea that we need to teach children to visualize.
My God, people are going to go crazy. That's been in the classrooms, like, oh my God.
Yeah.
Well, it may sound right, and it may be good, and it may be right, and it sounds okay, but I'm just saying that as far as I know, there is very limited research evidence that supports that. I need to be allowed to amend that, though, as I do a systematic review, but that's what I've had other people tell me who are researchers who have investigated it.
I think visualizing is a helpful support. Like, we use visuals to get to another place, right? But we don't think that's critical. It's not critical. We know it's not critical.
Trina, I'm like visualizing what's behind you, like a palm tree. You look very zen right now. Where are you really, Trina? The honeymoon's over, lady.
No way. That's my view from my honeymoon. That's the sunrise.
Beautiful. So, you know what? There are a lot of comments here in the chat.
A lot. And I feel bad that Laura and Brittany are still on. They probably want to go to bed and prepare for tomorrow. I did write in the chat that if you ladies wanted to hop off, you were allowed to hop off a long time ago, but you're still here and we love you.
We're happy that they stayed on.
Amazing, right? Faith, what about the comment from Leslie? Leslie is a big champion for this topic. She wrote, if they don't have the language, a strategy will not help much. They build each other. Strategies are a vehicle to help build the language, but the language is the goal. How do you all feel about that one?
Yeah.
Well, yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
You know Leslie, and she knows that's exactly what I said.
She's right.
I mean,
Yes. And
100%.
so I think we could probably conclude with that comment. I think that's a good place to wrap up. I think a lot of people were agreeing with what you were saying. And, I think they were kind of summarizing as we were going. If there are any other questions, we will forward those to you. We appreciate your time. Thank you so much for joining us again. I do think this was definitely more explicit and systematic in how we approach this conversation. And we did have some background knowledge from the last time. So we were using all of those pieces to come up with a really great conversation. So thank you so much. Judy, do you have any last thoughts?
Trina and Doug will be at a conference this summer. You want to tell everybody where they could come see you this summer?
Yeah. Trina and I are going to be at the Big Sky Conference, and we are mentors there. It's such a privilege, and we are going to be surrounded by the most amazing researchers and educators. And so we're very excited about just sharing what we know and learning from others there. It's going to be the Big Sky Literacy Conference is absolutely phenomenal. And their mantra is language is everything. And I couldn't recommend this conference more. It really is a remarkable, transformative experience.
And I'm just gonna drop a few little treats, because what we're planning on talking about is how to do structured literacy for the upper strands of Scarborough's rope. And we're also hoping to reveal something new for all of our teachers so that they can do this structured literacy in their classrooms. So that's the place where we're going to try to do that. And also talk about our instrument that diagnoses or helps professionals diagnose dyslexia and DLD, or developmental language disorder, in a fraction of the time to be used as a screeners. That's our other topic that we'll be talking about at Big Sky. So.
Wow. Well, maybe after you do it at Big Sky, you could kind of flesh that out with us on the Literacy View. We would love to hear about that.
Faith, I think that these two, Doug and Trina, and our other guests are now your No BS besties. What do you think? They're on the list?
100%. They are in the No BS Bestie Club for sure.
Woo!
All right.
Wait, one more thing. So we had a secret chat going on. Doug, you weren't on it, but I'll add you on Messenger.
What?
Yeah.
I'm so left out.
It was with Trina. She's been preparing, and it's called the
Trina.
I know, and what I prepared was ORF. Guys, I prepared for ORF for you, and we didn't even talk about it.
Oh my God, Faith, how did you leave ORF? Can we do 2 minutes of ORF? Wait.
Look how she blames me, Faith. How did you leave off?
Wait. We're getting off topic. We're called the Badass Literacy Group. The Badass Literacy Group. Trina, give us a little nugget before we sign off. I'm not going to say anything after ORF. Just say something about ORF now, please. ORF is my life.
Okay, guess what? ORF is a great measure, just not for reading comprehension. There are more recent innovations that are much, much better. Okay, that's all. That's all I want to say.
Wait, I want to add to it just real fast. I just want
to say nuggets.
No, just real fast. That was a beautiful nugget, Trina. I just need to say this: that yes, oral reading fluency correlates with comprehension with young children, and I just need to say this: hearing also correlates with comprehension, and they correlate for the same reason. If you can access the code and it's simple language, you will understand it. It works for oral language and it works for written language. That's why you have a correlation. It doesn't tell you whether you understand something or not. They're not causal. They are correlated. I know that's a lot, and I know that's aggressive, but we just have other measures that actually do measure comprehension that we should use instead of relying on a proxy that does not measure comprehension.
Oh my God.
Not only that, it doesn't inform what you should do for comprehension. You cannot improve reading comprehension by reading faster. Those are not the same things. So,
Well,
very important.
we're going to end right here, but I think that last bit needs to be an episode by itself. And I think we need to bring on some fluency experts to talk about this. because-
Wow. With Trina and Doug together in the
Oh,
room.
and that would be an enjoyable conversation.
course
it
it would.
won't be a contentious conversation. It would
It's
be
not like we
wonderful.
disagree with ORF.
Yep.
Right? We believe in it. You should build reading fluency. You should do those things.
Yeah.
It's just not a helpful measure of reading comprehension, or it's not even a measure of reading comprehension. It's a measure of accuracy and speed of decoding.
Oh my God, I'm still uncomfortable by this. Let's end this tonight.
I love it,
Trina.
Judy.
I don't know. I don't know. I only have water, but I think I need a vodka or tequila shot or something before I go to bed.
I honestly think ORF is one of the most misinterpreted correlations with reading. This right here.
I can't take it.
I
tonight.
honestly, I do think that needs to be in an episode by itself.
Yeah, I agree. There's too much to cover.
What's that going to be? Part 4, Faith?
We'll see. We'll see.
By the time we're done with Trina and Doug, we'll be like on part 700.
All right, guys. Thank you for joining us. This was a lot of fun. And we'll talk to you next time.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you. And I've enjoyed reading the comments, but it wanted me to sign in somewhere to be able to add to them. So sorry I didn't reply to any of them. And
Thank you so much. Thank you, all 4 of you,
Thank
for
you,
all the work
Brittany.
that you do to support teachers and students and everybody. Just thank you so much for tonight.
Thank you. Thank you so much. All right. Good night, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.